So I think there are a lot of ideas about that ring true, but not everything about that is completely interchangeable. The approaches to online teaching was something else that I wanted to talk about that in the chapter that we read, those few different roles that Rice talks about. I think one of the ideas that really stuck out to me is that all of these roles are something that teachers should use at some point. There's going to be a time and a place for all of these roles, both in online education and in brick and mortar education. So that was just something that, as I was reading, I was like, oh yeah, I do that at this point, or oh, that's something that teachers should do. So that kind of stuck out to me. I think the guide on the side becomes harder in an online setting because really the idea that stuck out to me there was this idea of distance and this physical separation. There's a quote on page 74 that says, in online environments, because there's a physical separation between the learner and the teacher, factors other than the lack of physical presence come into play. So this idea that the quality of the interaction that you have with your students really, really matters. I put in the icebreakers in brick and mortar versus online education bullet there because I think about, some of the icebreakers that I've done as a student, and even some that I've done as a teacher that wouldn't work in online education because you don't have that same kind of physical interaction with them. You can't really read them in the same way that you can read a student that you're looking at face to face. So that was something that really quality is really important in those interactions. The instructor role is very, very different in the online world than in brick and mortar because there's so much parental involvement in the instructor role. They are working with parents so closely in that design of material and assessment and even curriculum that it's very different than what you'd see in a brick and mortar school. I definitely think it's beneficial in some ways because, of course, you want parents to know what their kids are learning because they are going to go home at some point. But at the same time, I think too much parental involvement can be dangerous. So I definitely think that is the role as outlined in this book that is most significantly different. The group facilitator, the expectation of communication is the same, but the process is going to be a little bit different because you have that, like I said before, that immediate gratification versus the wait time. In a brick and mortar school, you can walk up to the teacher and ask a question and immediately get your response. The teacher isn't just going to sit there and stare at you and not respond. They're going to have to respond at some point versus the wait time that you get with an online educator. If you're not in a synchronous lesson, you are going to have to wait for them to respond. So that's definitely the expectation of communication is there, but the approach is different. And then the advisor, this is really just a role that stuck out to me because the idea of active listening here was really important to me. I always tell my students, I can hear when you're not listening more than I can see when you're not listening, because on your face, it may look like you're listening, but when you're in a classroom, there is a different kind of silence when students aren't listening. It's like hollow. You're talking to yourself. You can hear that on a headset as well. But you don't have that physical affirmation and that reinforcement to try again if you screw up. So if you screw up and you're not listening to what your student in an online setting says, it's going to be a little bit different, in my opinion, than if it were a brick and mortar classroom, because in my classroom, I know like there are some times that I'm not paying attention, and I'll admit it, there are some times that I'm not paying attention, and I just think like, okay, well, I can apologize. I can, like laugh and smile and whatever and be like, yeah, I'm really sorry. Like I'll pay attention now. But because you have that less physical space, in an online environment, you don't want those kids to feel like they are being left out or like they're not being heard. So I just feel like if you mess up in an online environment, it's going to be a lot harder to gain that trust back. So, all roles that need to be approached at some point in time, but in different ways. And then finally, the INACOL standards. The qualities that fit through those commercials for me were kind of a lot revolving around the diversity of online education. So K-12 said, we teach the individual, not the group. It's the very first screen that comes up on their computer, or on their commercial. And then in that, they say we differentiate for each student, which really goes with that F standard of diversity and accommodation. They're going to make sure that each student gets their own kind of learning. The interaction and development with parents was also with K-12. You have a lot of parents who are in that commercial kind of talking about what their role is and their involvement is with the school, which goes with standard J, which is that interaction with colleagues and parents and support staff to support the student's success. The individualized learning plan is talked about in the K-12 commercial as well, which goes with standard H, that the teacher develops assessments that measure the student's achievement, and really goes with that, like, this plan is for you. This is how you're going to learn best. And then again with K-12, one of the parents made the comment about how it reaches the top learners and the bottom learners. And that goes back to that diversity and accommodation standard. And then Connections Academy had a quote that said, activities help them build friendships, grow socially, and just have fun, which really relates to standards B and C, because it's about using a wide range of technology to support student learning and engagement and active learning and collaboration. So even though they're not in the same room as each other, still being able to use that technology to make them collaborate and build these friendships and help them in their learning. Really, to me, the only thing that I saw that was truly emphasized, but didn't really fit with the INACOL standards, kind of showed up in every commercial, is that we teach the individual, not the group. Now, I used it on the other page of something that does fit, but it's also something that doesn't, because standards B and C talk about how you want students to collaborate and engage, and it should be active, and they should be able to speak to each other. But then their statements and their almost like mission statement is, we're going to make sure that this is about your kid and not about everybody else. So I feel like it's kind of contradictory there, almost, that you want it to be collaborative, but you're also talking about how this isn't about teaching the group. Now, with that being said, I teach the individual and not the group while teaching the group. So yes, of course, you have to teach everybody the same differently. You're going to teach them as a group, but each one of them is going to have their own individual needs. So just because it doesn't fit the INACOL standards doesn't mean that it's a bad teaching strategy. I thought there was a lot of really great information in all of the videos and readings, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the semester. Thanks for watching.